Under the crimson sky of the Deathworld, the air shimmered with heat, and the ground itself seemed alive with hidden threats. Razor grass swayed in the wind, sharp enough to slice the hide of grazing creatures, and every shadow promised teeth and venom. The alien settlers who had chosen to build a village at the valley's edge lived in constant fear, for the beasts of this world knew no mercy. Each night their fires burned high and their songs fell silent as the howls of night maws rolled. Down from the ridges, huge predators with jaws that could crack stone and claws that dug trenches with each step. On this evening, as the sun melted into red horizons, a final desperate call was sent into the void of space, a plea for help that few dared to answer. When the sound of engines filled the air, the villagers froze, for they did not expect salvation. A small dropship cut through the clouds, black against the burning sky. It landed with a hiss of dust and steam, and when the ramp fell open, only one figure walked out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in battle gear scarred from countless campaigns. His eyes were steady, his steps sure, and the way he carried himself made even the restless night maws pacing in the distance falter. The villagers whispered to each other that a human had come, and the old ones shivered, for they remembered the tales that humans were children of a death world themselves. The warrior did not shout orders or demand obedience. Instead, he knelt near a cracked well and pulled tools from his pack. With calm hands, he cleaned the filter and repaired the pump so water once again spilled cool and clear. The villagers gathered, watching his quiet strength. He offered food from sealed rations, taught them how to build a fire shield against the bitter winds, and listened when the leader of the village spoke of their plight. His presence carried a weight that stilled panic and replaced it with something they had not felt in seasons. Hope as night fell, the warrior studied the land. He walked the perimeter, noting tracks along the edges of the valley. He crouched low, touched the soil, and understood patterns that others missed. The night maws did not move at random. Something was driving them. Toward the village, their trails curved as if forced from higher ground. In the dark brush, he found shards of metal too clean and sharp to belong to nature, fragments of machines left behind by unseen hands. His jaw tightened, for he recognized the marks of interference. The wind shifted and a low hum carried across the plains, mechanical, unnatural. It stirred the night maws into restless growls. The warrior rose and looked into the dark ridge where a line of glowing eyes appeared, dozens of predators, their forms hulking in the shadows. But then, instead of charging, they turned and fled back into the black hills, leaving silence heavy in their wake. The villagers gasped, for never before had they seen the beasts retreat. The human warrior understood then that the danger to the village was not the predators themselves, but whatever force could make even Deathworld beasts run. He tightened the straps on his armor and let his breath steady, for he knew the fight had only begun, and the true enemy waited just beyond the ridge. At first light, the human warrior rose from the hard ground, his eyes scanning the valley that stretched like a wound across the Deathworld. The crimson dawn revealed fresh tracks pressed deep into the soil, wide arcs that showed the beast had not simply fled but had been driven. The villagers gathered at a distance, whispering to one another, uncertain if this lone human could truly protect them. He tightened the straps on his gear and without a word began to follow the trails. His steps were quiet, steady, his movements guided by instinct and experience that came only from surviving places just as hostile as this one. He carried little more than a coil of wire, a rope, a ceramic blade, and a pack of tools. Yet in his hands, even the simplest things became weapons and traps. He climbed the jagged ridge that rose above the village, the air buzzing with a faint vibration that prickled the skin. At the crest, he found the source, a metal relay, half buried, in stone, pulsed with a blue glow, sending invisible signals across the valley. The hum it gave off was harsh, unnatural. It agitated the beasts, drove them toward the settlement. He recognized the design, a poacher's tool used to herd predators into killing grounds or villages marked as expendable. He knelt and studied the device, careful not to trigger its defenses. Symbols scratched into the casing revealed the sigil of a mercenary hunt guild. He had crossed paths with their kind before, men and women who turned fear into profit. They sold pelts, claws, and fangs to buyers across the stars and did not care how many settlements burned in the process. With slow, deliberate motions, he cut the power lines and silenced the relay. The land itself seemed to exhale in relief when the hum faded. But his relief was brief because only moments later, a second signal rose from deeper within the canyon, louder and stronger, as though mocking his effort. He descended into the canyon shadows, rapping. Around him the air grew colder and the cries of creatures echoed off the stone walls. In a clearing, he stumbled upon a young nightmaw trapped beneath a collapsed snare, its leg pierced by jagged steel. The beast thrashed in pain, its eyes wild with fury. When it saw him approach, it roared the sound, shaking the stones loose from the cliffs. Yet he did not raise his blade. Instead, he spoke in a calm, steady voice. Words the creature could not understand, but a tone that carried no malice. Slowly, he cut the snare away and pressed a seal of medicine over the wound. The nightmaw stilled, watching him with cautious eyes before limping back into the dark brush, leaving behind only a low growl that carried something less like hatred and more like recognition. The warrior continued on until the canyon opened into a plateau where the second relay pulsed brighter than the first. Its signal cut through the morning air like a knife, and drones floated above it. Black machines with red eyes, scanning for threats. One beam of light swept across the ground and locked on his chest. For the first time since his arrival, he felt the thrill of battle tighten his muscles. The drones descended, weapons primed, and the warrior braced himself, knowing the Hunt Guild was no longer hiding. They knew he was here, and they would do everything to stop him before he uncovered the full scope of their plan. The drones swooped down with a shrill mechanical whine, their weapons spitting bursts of energy that scorched the rocks around him. The human warrior moved with calm precision, every step a memory from countless battles. He rolled behind a stone pillar, letting one drone overcommit, before he lashed out with the coil of wire, snapping it around its frame and dragging it hard against the canyon wall where it shattered into sparks. The second and third pressed closer, their red eyes glowing. But he threw a weighted stone into the air, drawing their fire upward. And in that fraction of a moment, he lunged forward, driving his ceramic blade deep into the exposed core of one drone, before kicking it away and using its broken shell as a shield against the other. The fight ended as quickly as it began, smoke rising into the canyon as the last drone fell in two broken pieces. Following the uplink trail, he discovered a forward camp hidden beneath a canopy of camouflaged netting. Inside were cages lined with claw marks and collars humming with faint energy signatures. The sight made his stomach tighten, for these were not tools of protection, but of enslavement. The mercenary guild had captured beasts, forced them into obedience, and turned them into weapons for profit. He moved through the camp, silently reading logs projected from stolen consoles. Payments tallied shipments, listed destinations across the stars. Each number represented suffering sold to the highest bidder. In one file, he found the plan that turned his calm to steel fury. The guild intended to unleash an entire herd of nightmaws on the village during their upcoming harvest festival, when every villager would be gathered in the square. They would be stampeded and slaughtered. Then the guild would claim the land under the guise of failed colonization. He began sabotaging their equipment, loosening fuel lines, cutting control wires, planting faults in their data cores. But the alarm tripped when he shattered a collar rack. The sirens wailed, lights flared, and mercenaries rushed to arms. A towering gunship lifted from its pad, its cannon sweeping the field, and from the command deck, a voice boomed through loudspeakers that froze him in place. The guild commander knew his name. The voice was deep and mocking, dripping with recognition from a past battlefield. The commander reminded him of the city markets they once burned together, and how the human had ruined the guild's profit by freeing slaves. Now the commander promised to repay that loss with the death of every settler. The commander triggered. A failsafe, and high above on the far plateau, a massive tower roared to life. Its pulse was stronger than the smaller relays, its blue surge spreading across the clouds themselves. The beasts would no longer be merely driven, but maddened until reason and fear were burned away. They would crush everything in their path. He had little time to act, and the mercenaries swarmed closer. Then the ground shifted in the brush behind him, and a shape emerged. It was the young nightmaw he had freed earlier, its wound bound by crude healing, but its eyes steady. Not with rage, but with recognition. It lowered its head slightly and let out a sound that was almost a call. and when the human stepped toward it, the creature turned and slipped into a hidden tunnel system under the ridge, guiding him through a labyrinth of stone. The warrior followed, trusting the strange alliance of man and beast, until he climbed a final ledge and stood on the cliff, overlooking the plateau. The massive tower glowed brighter, its hum shaking the bones of the land, and as he gazed at the spreading storm, he understood the scale of the threat. For the first time since setting foot on the Deathworld, he knew the enemy was not only ruthless but clever, and the war for the village had just begun. The human warrior descended from the ridge with urgency etched into every movement. The plateau tower pulsed with unnatural light, its signal already stirring the predators into frenzied cries that echoed across the valley. By the time he returned to the village, the settlers had gathered in fear, their faces pale under the crimson sky. The elder stepped forward, asking if their doom had come, but instead of speaking of despair, the human spoke with calm conviction. He told them that the beasts could be turned not through strength alone, but through preparation and unity. He sketched lines in the dirt, showing where trenches could be dug, where mirrored sheets could scatter the beasts, and where noise barriers could break the force of a stampede. The villagers at first stared in disbelief, but his steady eyes compelled them to act, and soon the sound of tools striking earth filled the valley as they labored together. He placed the strongest near the weakest points of defense, setting farmers with sturdy arms along the trenches and hunters with bows at the water lures. Children were guided into the stone hall where torches burned bright and the walls rang with ancient chants meant to steady frightened hearts. The warrior moved among them, helping drive stakes, showing how to tie ropes, teaching them how to move not as scattered prey, but as a single body with a purpose. The people began to feel courage grow within them, for if a lone human could stand unflinching before death, world beasts, then perhaps they too could endure. As the sun dipped low, the air vibrated with a growing hum. The first wave of predators appeared on the horizon, eyes glinting like embers in the dusk. The villagers braced, gripping tools and weapons with trembling hands. The human warrior walked calmly to the front line and breathed deeply, his slow rhythm steadying those beside him. When the beasts charged, the trenches held. The mirrored sheets reflected strange patterns that confused their advance, and the water channels diverted some away. The villagers followed his instructions with desperate precision, striking torches and shouting in unison to drive the creatures back. For a moment it seemed that together they might endure the onslaught, but the mercenary guild had planned for more than beasts. The sky split as gunships roared through the storm clouds and mercenaries descended on cables, their rifles gleaming with cruel intent. Panic surged among the villagers as the machines of war touched down. The commander of the guild strode forward, tall in black armor, dragging the elder by the arm. His amplified voice carried across the valley, declaring that the settlement would be spared only if they handed over the human who had defied them. The beasts prowled restlessly at the edges. The villagers froze, torn between terror and loyalty. The human warrior stepped forward with no fear in his eyes. He met the gaze of the commander, and then slowly raised his hands as though surrendering. Yet with a subtle gesture he tapped 2 fingers against his thigh, a signal hidden from the mercenaries but seen by the villagers who had been trained to recognize his silent commands. It meant the fight was not over. It meant the second phase had begun. As the mercenaries bound his arms and led him toward the waiting gunship, the villagers clenched their tools and whispered their courage back into place, for they now understood that his capture was not the end, but the spark of a greater plan. The sky above throbbed with the glow of the tower, and the ground trembled with the approach of countless beasts. But in the hearts of those who had seen the human lead them, there was no surrender, only the first embers of defiance. The mercenaries dragged the human warrior across the mud toward the base of the towering machine that pulsed with unnatural light. His wrists were bound behind him. Blood ran from a cut across his side, and yet his steps did not falter. The commander walked ahead, his black armor gleaming in the glow of the storm above, taunting him with every stride, reminding him of past defeats and promising that this would be his final one. The villagers watched from the ridge, helpless, their courage tested as they saw the only figure who had stood for them now, shackled and wounded. But the warrior's eyes spoke louder than the commander's words. Calm, steady, unbroken inside. The tower. The air hummed with power. Great coils rising like the spines of some metal beast, arcs of lightning crawling between them. Each pulse sent ripples through the valley, shaking the ground and pushing the predators into madness. The commander reveled in the chaos, declaring that the beasts would soon overrun the settlement, leaving nothing behind but bones and ashes. The warrior listened without a word, but in his mind he measured every cable, every vibration, every weakness of the machine. For him, defeat was not an end. It was only another angle from which to strike. When the guards shoved him into a holding chamber, he pressed his back against the wall and breathed steady. He felt the cuffs heating from the electrical surges of the tower. He remembered iron sand by the riverbed that sparked under touch, remembered storms on his homeworld, that humans had learned to ride instead of fear. He had hidden a shard of ceramic beneath the tape on his arm earlier when they struck him, and now with slow, deliberate pain he worked it free, cutting at the cuffs as the storm outside gathered strength. A flash of lightning split the sky, thunder shaking the tower, and in that moment of noise and fire he tore free. The cuffs cracked, the shard cut deep into his skin, but freedom mattered more than blood. He slipped through the maintenance shaft, crawling through shadows where mercenaries could not see him. He reached the core chamber where the main conduits sang with energy, and there he laid his plan. He poured packets of iron sand from his pouch along the coils, wedging them with bits of wire and rope to form a crude trap. One surge would send the sand into molten fire, blinding sensors, frying circuits and severing the collars. Of every enslaved beast, the commander found him there. Gun-leveled words heavy with triumph. He fired once, the bolt searing across the human's ribs and staggering him to his knees, but the warrior still pressed the final wire into place with shaking hands. Blood soaked his armor, his breath ragged, yet his eyes burned with unbroken fire. He lifted one arm toward the storm raging above and shouted a single word. The sky answered with a spear of white light that slammed into the tower. The entire structure convulsed as if struck by the hand of a god, and the last thing seen before the explosion of thunder was the human standing tall against the blaze, daring death itself to try and take him. The tower screamed as the lightning tore through. Its veins, the iron sand ignited in molten bursts, and the pulse that had enslaved the predators shattered into silence. For one moment the valley seemed to hold its breath. Then the beasts that had once been thralls raised their heads as the collars sparked and fell to the ground. Their eyes burned with fury, not confusion. And the nightmaws let loose a roar that rolled across the plains, shaking stone loose from the cliffs. The human warrior staggered from the wreckage, smoke rising from his armor, blood dripping from his side, yet his posture was unbroken. He had not destroyed the beasts, he had given them back their freedom. The commander cursed from the deck of his gunship, ordering his troops to kill him, but the tide had already turned. The young nightmaw he had once freed from the cruel snare charged through the storm and lowered itself so that the human could climb onto its back. Its scarred body moved like thunder, and together they rode into the fray. The villagers who had once believed themselves helpless now rose with a cry of defiance. They struck at mercenaries with farm tools and bows, guided by the courage the human had lit within them. The beasts that had terrorized the land now crashed through the mercenary, lines tearing through their machines with claws and fangs, not in blind rage but with the clarity of vengeance. The commander tried to rally his men, but every order was drowned beneath the chaos. A gunship exploded in the distance, ripped apart by a stampede of freed predators. Another fell when villagers lit fire traps along its landing struts. The battlefield had become a storm of smoke, fire beast and man, with the human warrior and the nightmaw carving a path straight through the heart of the mercenary camp. He struck with precision, not wasteful rage, dismantling turrets, tearing down signal poles, cutting the enemy apart. Piece by piece. The commander, seeing his forces collapse, activated the last card in his hand, the core of the base set to self-destruct. A rising alarm blared through the storm, promising to incinerate everything in the valley if not stopped. The human spurred the nightmaw into a final charge, crashing through reinforced doors to reach the heart of the camp. Inside the core chamber, firelight glowed from the overheating reactors and the air shook with the countdown. A console waited with two keys turned in unison, required to halt the process. He secured one key with a bloodied hand, but the other lay across the room, guarded by mercenaries with rifles raised. Before they could fire, the villagers stormed in behind him, led by the elder who had once stood trembling. Now she seized the second key with steady hands, her face hard with resolve. The mercenaries fell beneath a rain of arrows and stones, and the villagers stood beside the warrior not as people waiting to be saved, but as fighters willing to risk everything. Together, they prepared to turn the keys as the reactor heat rose and the floor cracked beneath their feet. The countdown screamed toward its final second, the fate of the valley, and all who lived in it balanced on the strength of human and alien standing side by side. Reactor chamber roared with heat as the human warrior and the village elder stood at opposite ends, their hands gripping the keys that would decide whether life or death consumed the valley. The countdown voice blared through the smoke numbers, echoing like a hammer against the heart of every living soul. The human's vision blurred from blood loss, his side burning with each breath, but his grip never loosened. He met the eyes of the elder across the chamber and gave a single nod. Together, they turned the keys in unison. The consoles groaned. The alarm screamed one last time, then the numbers froze. The heat that threatened to tear the core apart drained slowly into silence. For a moment there was no sound, but the beating of hearts. Then the chamber doors burst open and the commander stumbled inside his black armor. Scorched, his face twisted with fury. He raised his weapon, aiming at the elder, but the human stepped forward, placing himself in the line of fire. The commander sneered, calling him a stubborn relic. But before he could pull the trigger, the ground shook and the young Nightmaw, the very beast once trapped by the guild, lunged through the doorway, knocking him sprawling. The weapon clattered away and the commander found himself face to face with the creature's glowing eyes. Its roar was a sound that belonged to the planet itself, primal and final. The commander begged for a ship, promising wealth, promising silence, but the human did not kill him. He bound the commander's wrists and activated the mercenaries' own broadcast equipment, projecting the truth to every listening ear across the sector. Images of cages, collars, and slaughter spilled into the data streams. Records of payments and guild contracts lit across the stars. The crimes could not be buried, and within minutes long-range patrol signals responded, confirming that justice was already on its way. The mercenary guild would fall not by blade alone, but by truth that could not be silenced. Outside, the storm broke its fury exhausted, and the air cleared for the first time in many cycles. The villagers stepped from the hall, blinking against the light, seeing not ruin, but survival. The beasts that had once stalked them lingered at the edge of the valley, but they did not approach with hunger. Their collars shattered, their freedom returned. They seemed to stand as watchful guardians rather than enemies. The young Nightmaw lowered itself at the village gate, and for the first time the children dared to touch its scarred hide, leaving offerings of meat and clean water as thanks. In the days that followed, the villagers built a new hall at the center of their settlement. A stone plaque was placed above the door, carved with the names of those who had stood their ground against terror. They made the door low so that all who entered would bow in respect to those who had given their courage. The human walked among them, helping to lift beams and set stones, never taking more praise than a nod of quiet gratitude. When the patrol ships finally arrived, they took the commander away in chains and declared the planet protected. No guild would ever claim it again. The villagers gathered to see the human off his dropship, ready for departure. The elder thanked him with words simple but heavy, that they had found strength because he had shown them how to believe in themselves. He only smiled quietly, fastening his gear, though the wound on his side still ached. He looked toward the ridge, where the Nightmaw stood waiting. Its roar rose into the sky, not of fear but of respect and farewell. As his ship lifted into the clean air, the villagers raised their hands and voices in a cheer that carried across the valley. The beasts watched, in silence, and even the land itself seemed calmer, less hostile, as though it too acknowledged what had been done. The human warrior gazed down one last time at the place where he had turned prey into fighters and predators into allies. He left not as a conqueror but as a keeper of balance, and as the dropship vanished beyond the clouds, the legend of the day. Even Deathworld beasts ran spread across the stars, whispered with awe, wherever stories of humans were told. The village lay quiet in the aftermath of storm and fire. The air washed clean as if the land itself had chosen to breathe again. The people no longer huddled in fear, but walked with shoulders lifted, their eyes alive with the memory of standing together against what once seemed unstoppable. The beasts that had haunted their nights now prowled the ridges not as enslaved monsters, but as free rulers of their world. And even they seemed to keep a silent watch over the settlement, as though acknowledging a new pact carved in struggle and blood. The human warrior walked among them for a short while longer, teaching small things that would matter in the years to come: how to listen to the rhythm of the earth, how to build barriers from the very stone and grass that once cut them, how to fight not with desperation but with purpose. He said little, yet every gesture carried the weight of a teacher who gave everything without asking anything in return. When the day of departure came, the people gathered at the square. Where once they had prepared to die, now they came together to give thanks. The elder stepped forward, her voice steady and proud, saying that the human had not only saved their lives but had given them the gift of seeing what courage truly meant. He bowed his head in silence, for he had never come for glory, only because no voice asking for help should ever go unanswered. The dropship engines stirred and the villagers pressed their hands to their chests, while the children traced his shadow, as if to hold it forever. At the edge of the valley, the scarred nightmaw stood tall, its golden eyes fixed upon the man who had freed it from pain. It lowered its head in a gesture no one had ever seen before, a gesture not of submission, but of respect. The human paused before boarding the ship, and for a long breath he and the beast regarded one another, two survivors born of different worlds, yet bound by a shared defiance of chains. Then he turned and ascended the ramp, his figure framed against the rising sun. The ship lifted on a column of fire cutting across the clean sky, while the villagers and beasts alike watched in silence. The roar of the engines faded into the distance, and in its place rose the deep call of the nightmaw, echoing like a promise carried on the wind. It was not a cry of fear or rage, but a song of remembrance that would mark this day for generations to come. They would tell their children of the moment when even Deathworld beasts ran, and when a lone human warrior turned despair into strength and silence into hope. The end.